WWE programming is television programming. Yeah, I know that seems rather obvious, but we oftentimes don't take a look at all that entails. Just look at camera work, for example. Filming anything requires a whole lot of know-how, but then you couple that with all of the complications that come with putting on a live wrestling event, and you have a really monumental task. However, WWE, despite that, seems to put it on week after week with almost flawless execution. No easy task. So I figure, why not take the time and acknowledge all of the details that we take for granted by sitting on this side of the TV screen? Because today, a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters, such as Baba Yaga and Rick Rack. Thank you so much. Without a shadow of a doubt, WWE has the best TV production in all of wrestling history. Sure, you may not agree with every single one of their individual choices, and they do make mistakes like anybody else. However, in the end, they have a better executed product, and they have a higher production value than any wrestling promotion ever. What makes me so sure about this? Well, it becomes undeniable when you dive into the details, particularly when it comes to how they film wrestling. But before we get into that, let's review just a little bit of history.
The television was first invented in 1927 by Philo Taylor Farnsworth.
Not that far back in history. Okay, when it comes to television and wrestling, the two are almost inseparable because they fit so naturally well together. Back in the early days when TVs first started becoming a standard household item, wrestling was one of the biggest programs there was. This was for a few reasons. One, it did very well with viewership, especially thanks to a specific wrestler named Gorgeous George, which I already covered in a previous video. In addition, wrestling was also much less expensive to produce compared to other sports. Baseball, football, golf, these required massive outdoor fields, and the outdoors not always the most practical place for broadcasting back then. But with wrestling, on the other hand, that was something that you could easily produce inside, and a ring is relatively small in comparison to a field. Plus, you still get the benefit of having a live crowd who pay for tickets, as well as also contributing a lot of crowd noise for the show, which I already covered the in-depth ways of why that's so important, and I know you already seen that video, right? And if you haven't, definitely check that one out next. Okay, now as far as wrestling today is concerned, WWE has mastered the TV game with their use of the camera in a lot of ways that I don't think everyone necessarily picks up on. And my first example that I would like to point out is something that, well, is kind of hard to point out. I'm talking about where exactly is the camera itself. Some feel that the camera should be a fly on the wall and that seeing it breaks the illusion. In the early days of WWF, this was a bit more common, but in the modern day WWE, you almost never see the camera make it into any shots, despite the plethora that they have. However, this is not ironclad, as WWE cameramen do occasionally get shown, but it's covered up pretty quickly, and it's also not super obvious when it happens. But if it is super obvious, well, then you could probably rest assured that the cameraman is going to be part of an angle and was brought on screen on purpose. But with other promotions, that tends to be a little more apparent. Like with that one company that we're not allowed to talk about anymore, they tend to have a whole slew of number of photographers just running around outside the ring. And if you want a visual for that, well, I would love to give it to you, but I can't, so you might as well let that company know how you feel. And this does affect other promotions too, such as WCW, who often had camera crew right in the ring. This was a particular challenge when it came to matches like War Games, where WCW typically had two cameramen inside the cage, who could easily be seen and also had to be sure not to get in the way of any of the action. However, WWE on the other hand did things a little bit differently in order to minimize camera personnel appearing on screen. Instead of using two cameramen, WWE would only use one inside their double ring structure. Now occasionally, this one camera operator would be seen by the outside cameras, but it would be fleeting at best. And just keep in mind, this is just one instance of all the lengths that WWE will go to in order to slightly improve their optics. But while we're talking about cages, let's bring up the infamous Big Blue Cage. While some wrestlers hated it since it was pretty brutal to take on the chin and had no give, it definitely had its virtues, such as having larger openings that made it easier to see through the cage for outside shots. And these openings were even large enough that you could fit a camera lens through from the outside in order to get an uninterrupted interior shot while standing on the exterior. Now sure, this might seem like a whole lot of work to be putting into something that's really not that big of a deal, but when it comes to WWE, it's all about the aesthetics. And when you keep in mind that WWE now has a lot more cameras than older promotions did back in the day, then you'll realize that hiding all of them really is quite remarkable. The exact coordination needed to pull this off is like a well-staged ballet. Everyone knows how to stay out of each other's shots, but they also know how to not bump into each other at the same time. And remember, wrestling isn't always a perfectly plotted out performance. Things change, adjustments have to be made, and this team of camera people just have to roll with it. We give professional wrestlers a lot of credit for all of their precise movements, and we definitely should. But we often overlook all of the talented individuals who have to dance around that dance that wrestlers do in order to get it all on film. Oh, and speaking of this complex dance, there is yet another juggling act that goes on even beyond the cameras. But for that, we need to go to another room. The control room. Every cut you see on live television has to be done live as it happens because, well, you just can't edit it afterwards. So, for instance, right now you're looking at the main camera, the hard cam, if you will. But if this was a WWE show, there would be plenty more cameras to go around, and the physical act of moving between them would have to be done in the control room. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes these directions are written directly into the script, such as, well, cue B-roll, such as with entrances and backstage interviews. Cue control room. However, when the action's happening, the control room has to act on the fly, deciding which shot is best to use and when. And they do this with a whole team of people responding to commands like ready one, as in get camera one ready, and take one, as in go to camera one. And speaking of which, take one. Now, all this might seem relatively easy to you, but trust me, it's not, especially in the heat of the moment. And if you were dealing with as many cameras as WWE has, well, you can just imagine the kind of pressure that would be put on you in order to do the job right and do it live. But while we're talking about camera cuts, there's one more I definitely want to talk about, and it's the action cut. WWE is known for their heavy camera cuts, which is something that some people definitely don't care for. But there is one camera cut in particular that is a heavy topic of debate. And it's WWE's tendency to switch cameras directly on the moment of impact for moves. Now, younger fans who have simply grown up with this may not even notice it. But as for other fans, they absolutely hate this as they feel that it's completely nauseating, especially since WWE does it so often. This is done because WWE feels that it helps add emphasis to the move and because frequent camera cuts keep an audience's attention longer. But regardless as to how you feel about it, this is just yet another one of the many little things that WWE puts scrupulous amounts of effort into just in order to give you a better looking product. And it's something we really should pay more attention to. Well, there you go, a look at some of the television production work behind WWE, but what are some more camera tricks that you think deserve more credit? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and that you're subscribed to this channel. Thanks again for watching, and as always, Dave knows.